All right, Eva. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it. How's your night going?
Going pretty well. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So, for the people that don't know maybe who you are, I was wondering if you could give a little bit about your background, like where you came from and what it is that you do.
Sure. So I'm a legal coordinator with DXE, with Direct Action Everywhere, which is a grassroots animal rights network. And I've been doing that for, about a year, but I've been involved in DXE for more like five. And I've been vegan for a really long time and got involved with activism about a decade after I went vegan. And so right now I manage legal cases for the network. So we have a good handful of criminal cases and also a handful of civil cases, and we manage making sure that everybody has lawyers and that the kind of details of all those legal cases are communicated really well to the network and to the media.
Yeah, sounds very stressful, but I'm sure it's a super important job and very important for the organization as well. DXC. So let's talk a little bit about DXC, Direct Action Everywhere. If you can tell me a little bit about what you guys do and how you're different, I guess, from other vegan organizations, like, for example, everyone knows who PETA is. Tell me a little bit about how you guys are different.
So I think that when DXE first started, their goal was really to influence not only the world but the movement itself. And DXE has done a lot to really de-emphasize veganism in the context of the animal rights movement. And that's not to say that, we aren't vegan ourselves or that we want anyone to ever use animal products, but it's to say that the word vegan has caused a lot of problems for the animal rights movement. It's done something to really emphasize, in our view, humans and what humans do and what individual consumers do. And when we see veganism used as this kind of purity tactic, this way to kind of figure out who's in and who's out, we see the animal rights movement honestly shoot itself in the foot, because veganism is this word that really doesn't have a great definition. I mean, people they spend a lot of time arguing about what it means online, and we would say that those conversations could better be used to talk about animals and what animals are going through.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't tell you how proud I am to be vegan. I love that. But I 100% agree. I hate the fact that it can sometimes seem more of like a club, and people feel excluded when you bring it up in that sort of sense. So I love what you guys are doing. You're really focusing on the animals and what your work is really about, rather than just making it seem like it's an exclusive type of group. You're either in or out. So, yeah, I much of the work that you guys do, I believe you would consider animal liberation. And if you could tell me first of all, if you kind of explain what that means, and also what direct action means. That way, people can get a sense of the type of work that you guys do.
Sure. So, big questions. What is animal liberation? What is direct action? Direct action is one of the steps in Kingian nonviolence. So when we're really based on nonviolence, and a lot of us have studied what King taught, and he said that direct action is the one optional step when we're using a campaign for social change. Direct action is the step that happens when your adversaries refuse to negotiate with you, and you have to take direct action. And what we know is that for decades, the vegans and the animal rights movement have really been, if mentioned at all by the media, have been like a laughing stock. And direct action seeks to kind of elevate the conversation so that the animal liberation movement are actual adversaries to the people who we consider our opponents, to the industry and to the government that protects them. So direct action is kind of in a more granular scale. It's all the tactics that animal rights activists or any activist might use to really get the attention, to force the issue, to force their adversaries to come to the table and negotiate. And so that might look like protests. It might look like rescues that happen without the permission of the people who have animals in their custody. That might look like civil disobedience, like roadblocks, like chaining ourselves to the gates of a slaughterhouse. And we use the phrase direct action as pretty widely. So sometimes it just means going into a grocery store and protesting.
Right, right. And let's talk a little bit. You mentioned open rescues, I love the fact, like, I I've seen a lot of videos with direct action everywhere online, on YouTube. I always get goosebumps when you guys are able to successfully rescue animals from their death, essentially from slaughterhouses. They're literally, like, I remember watching this video. There are ducks literally on, what appears to be like hooks, and they're hooked on by their feet, and they're literally seconds away from having their throats sliced. I'm sorry for being a little graphic here, but it is what it is. And you guys are able to get like those animals, and I always get goosebumps. Like, it's amazing. So if you can talk a little bit about open rescue, what goes into that, how you guys do that, and also what ends up happening to the animals right after you guys rescue them.
Sure. So open rescue is a tactic that is used when there are places where we know that animals are being abused. So somebody's done some research, figured out an actual farm or slaughterhouse, or sometimes even research facility, a place where animals are being abused, and we know about it, and we'll send activists in to these places. We'll go in with cameras and kind of biosecurity gear to make sure that if we do enter, we don't bring any pathogens in with us, and we'll really document the conditions in these places, because there have been many investigations of factory farms before DXE, of course, and there have even been open rescues before DXE. But one thing that we've really tried to do is to emphasize the humane myth, and really draw attention to the fact that when you do AV or something, you go talk to people and try to convince them to go vegan. Many of the times you'll hear, "Oh, well, I only eat humane meat. I know where I get my milk." Whatever it is, they think that they do it the right way. And a lot of people think that they're doing it the right way, that, oh yeah, there are those factory farms that I know about, but that's not what I do. And so we'll actually target those places. We'll target those exact farms where they're saying that they're doing it the right way, that they're using imagery like humane or thoughtfully raised, or something to really let you know that this is the right kind of meat, this is the right kind of animal exploitation. And we'll send activists into those places to document the conditions. And more often than not, basically always, we come across someone who's in real medical distress, someone who wouldn't survive if we don't take them out. And in those contexts, we'll rescue the animals, and we'll do it really openly, because it's really important to us that we're not acting like criminals, because we believe that our actions are justified morally and sometimes even legally. And when that happens, we really want to tell those stories openly and tell the world that, like, this is something that a reasonable person would do. This is something anyone would do. When you come across an animal in need and you have the capacity to take them out, then you take them out. So after we take out animals, we would generally bring them to the vet. Always bring them to the vet pretty much immediately, as soon as possible, because these are animals in really significant medical distress. And we try to get them medical attention as quickly as possible. And then we have a lot of contacts with sanctuaries, with places that can take them. Sometimes activists will take care of the animals themselves. I myself lived with a dog who I rescued from a breeding and testing facility in Wisconsin. Lived with her I was able to foster her for a while after we rescued her, before she went to her forever home.
Tell me that story. Yeah, so how did that end up happening?
So Ridgeland Farms in Wisconsin is this giant, I think it's like 4,000 beagles per year, giant beagle farm in Wisconsin, and they supply dogs to all sorts of testing facilities, including the whole University of California system. And we found out about them, and were able to, in our investigation, we're able to watch the place a little bit, and there was actually just a door open. In farms, you often find open doors. That's really, really common in factory farms. It would be so expensive for farmers to lock every single one of their doors and unlock it every time they needed to use it. So they're generally just unlocked.
Is that because it's such a huge facility? And
yeah, we're talking about really, really huge facilities with like hundreds of thousands of animals on them often. And a beagle facility is a little bit different. It's run, has fewer animals for one, though they're held in basically the same confinement as your average factory farm. And the animals are much more expensive per animal. A chicken who is halfway through her lifespan, who's laying eggs, is worth nothing to industry. but a beagle could sell for thousands of dollars. And so they do keep their doors locked.
And what would they be used for, the Beagles?
Beagles are used for all sorts of different testing. They're used for cosmetics testing, for testing things like laundry detergents or household cleaners. There are all these tests that, for some reason, it's really interesting for scientists to find out what percent or how much of a substance it takes to kill 50% of a population. And so that's just a really common kind of routine test that you'll do when you're testing on animals, is just how many, how much of this substance does it take to kill 50 beagles, say. So they're doing things like force feeding and injecting chemicals into the blood, some medical tests. They're used for a lot of different purposes, and we were lucky enough to see kind of an open door, and so some of our activists were able to go in and investigate. We have a 360-degree video that we put out of this beagle farm, so you can actually see it for yourself. You can go in there and have kind of virtual reality gear on and really be immersed in the whole thing. And it's a really horrifying experience. The thing that was really unusual about the beagle farm is just the sound of it. Beagles are really known to howl, and when there's so many of them in one place, the sound is just ghastly. It's really a haunting experience.
Yeah, my friend used to have a Beagle, and they're lovely dogs, sweethearts. And I have two dogs. Most people have dogs, and to listen to a story like that, most people will be horrified. Nobody would
Right.
want their animals to go through that. And that's crazy. So you ended up going into this a facility. You saw an open door, and you found your opportunity, and just you grabbed your dog and ran.
Yeah, the activists who went inside, they took video, and there were I think a couple different entries, and at one point an alarm was going off, which they couldn't even hear because they were so far from the alarm, and the beagles are so loud. And once they got word that there was an alarm going off, they were able to literally just grab a dog and run out of the place, which you can experience this on the 360 video. But it is really heartbreaking about beagles, because beagles are the individuals who are bred to be calm and kind and loving. And that's the reason they're used in testing, is because you can abuse them and and they still love humans after all of that.
That should say something right
Yeah.
there, the fact that you do so much to them and they'll still love you. Like,
Right.
that
Yeah.
says something.
It's really amazing resilience that these dogs are social, that they'll make friends with humans, that they'll imprint on humans even now after years and years of abuse.
Wow. Yeah, seriously, you're a champion for doing that. That's awesome. So my next question, after hearing a story like that, and forgive me if I'm ignorant, but how is something like this legal, or is it legal, and how essentially do you guys get away with something like that?
So that's where my role comes in. For years and years, we were doing these open rescues, doing them openly, saying our names, showing our faces, openly telling the stories of the animals we rescued. And there were no charges. No DA was taking interest in prosecuting us at all. Even though we were being totally open, we were even writing to the companies, like they knew about us. And then all of a sudden, a couple of years ago, multiple prosecutions, felony prosecutions, came down all at once. So we're facing charges in Utah in two different counties. One of them involved an FBI investigation. Two different counties in North Carolina were facing felony charges. And also we have 6 felony defendants in Sonoma County here in California, where I am, who are facing felonies. We also had a couple of activists get hit with a huge restitution bill. So they're appealing it, but right now they're facing hundreds of thousands of dollars in restitution after one of their rescues. And so it was a huge just burst of repression all at once, because the old saying, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. We're moving through that, and all of a sudden it became very apparent to industry and to government that we were a real threat. And so now we're facing a lot of prosecutions. Now, none of these have gone to trial yet. And when we argue that these things are illegal, which we do, we say that there's a legal doctrine of necessity, which is kind of the same one. Like if you were to be charged with trespass after you rescue someone from a burning building, say you entered private property where you weren't welcome. You passed a no trespassing sign to get in, but there was something terrible happening inside. There was someone burning to death, and you rescued them. You would have an affirmative defense in court. You would be able to say, yes, I did the thing you're accusing me of doing, but it's legal because of necessity. And that's basically the principle that we are planning to use when we go into places where animals are being abused, where animals are being denied food and water because often they can't move themselves to food and water. Downed animals is super common in every type of species that I know about. And so we'll argue that, this is the lesser of two evils, that the trespass is not worse than the animal cruelty.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would imagine that from a monetary standpoint, these are essentially products of the farmer or the lab or whatever it is. I do remember when like hurricanes would hit and like North Carolina or whatever, South Carolina would flood. There'd be activists there rescuing, pigs, chickens, cows, if they can. Um, so I assume, in a situation like that, it would be perfectly fine. But I do remember watching a video, I think maybe Vice covered it too, where a big group, maybe 50 of you or 100 of you, went into this chicken farm and would grab chickens, and you all had a letter showing it to the farmer, we have the legal right to be here, and you essentially took the chickens and they could do nothing. How do you know the event that I'm talking about, or
I
maybe there's
do.
other ones similar? Can you talk about that? Like how can you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, how did you do
So
that?
there are three different cases, three different mass arrests that we've had in Sonoma County, California. And it sounds like you're talking about the first one, which was Sunrise Farms, which was in May of 2018. And in that case, we brought about 50 activists right onto the farm, right into the barns, and we picked up animals who couldn't walk, who were sick, and we brought them out. And I was there. I had a bird in my arms, and I was invited to walk up to the sheriff who was there and trying to tell us to leave, telling us we couldn't bring these animals out. And we showed the sheriff both the letter. We had a legal opinion with us saying that this is legal because this law scholar Hadar Abraham at UC Hastings in San Francisco, she reviewed both the footage of the farm and some legal doctrines. And one really great benefit that we have here in California is a law called California Penal Code 597E, and that's this law under the Animal Cruelty Code that says that if an animal has been without food and water for more than 12 hours, then it's okay for any citizen to just go in and take them out. And with these two ideas, the necessity defense and with 597E, we had a legal opinion saying that it's legal for us to go in and take animals out. The police weren't really sure about this. They weren't all that convinced, but they were pretty confused, and they just they let us go. A lot of us had actually planned to be arrested that day. And when they just let us go, we were a little confused ourselves. We sent the animals to the vet and to the sanctuary, and there are 37 survivors of that day. And then we walked right back on the farm to, rescue more animals if they would let us, but we didn't think they would. So they arrested 40 of us that day. Then we went back to Sonoma County because we wanted to show that this really is, a legal right of animals to be rescued and legal right of us to rescue them. And the next time we went back, they were a little less forgiving. They were much more quick to detain and arrest 58 people that day. And we had animals in our arms. We had chickens who were sick. Again, this was an egg farm I just described, but a farm where birds were used for meat at McCoy Poultry in Sonoma County. And we had birds in our arms, and it was one of the most tragic days of my life because they tore the animals out of our arms. They brought animal control and took birds out of our arms, and they did do veterinary examinations on them, and then they killed them. And it's a tragedy and it's horrible, but there is a veterinary record that exists for how just horrific the treatment was of these animals before they died. that they had been denied food and water for so long, that they had had these diseases that were completely untreated, because individualized care in a factory farm environment is just not something that happens. And one beautiful thing that happened that day was that there was one bird who got let go. There was one police officer who had just enough compassion for the animals, and she said that we could take the sickest one out. And that bird we named Rose, and she survived for just about a year after her rescue, just over a year. And she was really, she was disfigured. She couldn't really walk, but she got to live on a sanctuary for the rest of her life. And that was for most of her life. Birds are slaughtered when they're so young. So she was one of the few of her family, one of the only of her family who was able to really live into adulthood.
I think I remember that event where the chickens were torn out, right from you guys' hands. That's really sad. But what was I gonna say? These living conditions that you all have essentially proof. How do you prove that? Do you have investigators go in beforehand and take video and photographs to kind of have proof? And now you say, hey, look, we have proof, and now we're here to help.
Right. In this case, we had whistleblower footage from 12 hours prior, because we knew about the law, and we knew that if we knew that for 12 hours these same animals were being denied food and water, that we had the right to go in and assist them. And so we had footage from 12 hours prior, but also from before that. And we had quite a bit of footage from these facilities before we went to them. And what we plan to argue in court is that this is perfectly legal. But we did, after the September 2018 investigation, mass rescue or mass attempted rescue, when animals were taken out of our arms, we were hit with 7 felony charges for 6 different activists who were perceived to be in leadership. And these cases are continuing to this day. System moves very slowly, but we're really excited about these cases, and we really think it's going to be a great opportunity to have the argument in a public setting, because it's, once we can get the issue on the table, then it's our argument to win.
So you're essentially on the same level as murderers, rapists, terrorists, a felony for rescuing animals.
Right. Yeah. And there are different classes of felonies, but there was in North Carolina, our felonies are on the same plane as I saw assault by strangulation. Assault by strangulation in North Carolina is a Class H felony, as is the larceny charge that our folks are facing there. So it is pretty ridiculous to think of people who rescue animals who are, have never committed a crime in their life, who are not dangerous people to be around, as facing the same kind of prison time as people who are really violent.
Right. Man, I can't believe that. So yes, what we just talked about, you would say most of that is factory farms, but I want to talk about what you mentioned before about humane meat. Like, Chipotle is pretty proud of how they raise their animals. Whole Foods is another brand that comes to mind. So there's this term that's humane meat, raised with care, or whatever. Like all these terms that circulate the system. Talk a little bit about that and what you guys have experienced. How humane are these animals really being raised?
Sure. So all the farms that I've mentioned so far, I guess with the exception of the dog farm certainly has its own humane messaging around it. But leaving that one aside, all the farms I've talked about, in Sonoma County, they have humane messaging. Sunrise, where we rescue 37 hens, that is a Whole Foods supplier. McCoy is an Amazon supplier that's free range. These are places where, if you saw the package in the grocery store, you might think that this is the good kind, that this is the stuff where the animal didn't suffer. And it's false, because when we go to places that are called humane, we see factory farms, and we know that these are, there can be differences. There are cages and there are no cages, and it's hard to say which one you would rather be if you're going to be at an egg layer in one of those settings, because cages are intense confinement and a terrible way to live, and no cages is often cannibalism, is often birds so close together that they lash out and they literally eat each other alive just out of stress. and this is not something that happens, naturally, not something that ever happens in sanctuaries, but it's something that happens so routinely in factory farms. And this is something we've gotten straight out of farmers' mouths in court, saying that, oh, yeah, they die because they peck each other. That's just a normal part of business.
It almost looks like an inauguration speech inside of like a tiny warehouse. It's like so stuffed, and you would say that's considered technically free range.
Right. It's ridiculous, kind of what the reality versus the marketing is. And so right now we're involved in 3 different civil cases. And the first one is against Diestel Turkey Ranch, which is a Whole Foods supplier and is, I think, the first GAP 5+ turkey ranch to be certified, because it has this beautiful facility in Sonora, California, which supplies, I think, 1% of the birds that the company sells, and 99% of the marketing that they do is on this beautiful picturesque ranch. That and then they have also tons and tons of factory farms where they have other birds who also have the same marketing on them and marketing about them. And we're suing them for false advertising. The trial just ended, and we're hoping a decision from the judge within the next few months. And so that's exciting. And on the other front, we're being sued by Whole Foods and by Costco for protesting them, for going to their stores and telling the world about how they're lying to the public about how animals are being treated. So we're seeing kind of a backlash both from government through these criminal charges and from industry, who's just sick of us telling the truth to their customers, and they would really like to silence us, and they'd really like for us to agree to not protest, not tell the public what's going on in their barns. And so we're seeing a lot of places that are saying that they have humane practices who are acting quite defensively when we point out that they don't.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm super glad that you guys are shining light on that, because a lot of people are confused, thinking that they're doing a good thing by supporting Chipotle, Whole Foods, Costco, like you mentioned, thinking they're doing good, where in reality, it still leads to the same result as if you were to go through the McDonald's drive-through, essentially. Um, I want to ask you though, what are you guys' thoughts on, like, vegans who are trying to do their best and go to Chipotle and have it like a sofrita bowl, or go to Whole Foods and they buy their produce from there, or Costco, they'll get like Beyond Meat or whatever. Like they're supporting vegan food essentially, but from non-vegan restaurants or chains. How do you guys feel about that?
Well, I mean, we do it too. We all everyone who I know in DXE eats eats vegan. Some people kind of reject the term veganism, but I don't know anyone who would eat animals. And when we go when we start out in veganism, or at least when I started out as a vegan, I really thought of it as kind of this consumer boycott. And as I thought more, I kind of decided that it wasn't really a consumer boycott, because I'm really just one person, and to have an effective boycott, you really need a lot of people. Which even as all vegans, we aren't a very effective boycott. They're not really noticing that that vegans aren't buying their animal products. And so I started thinking of it more as kind of a way to influence the people around you, the way to normalize or denormalize eating animals. And so I absolutely will sometimes go to so when we talk about boycott and we have a dispute with Whole Foods, we're not boycotting Whole Foods. Like, I sometimes shop there, and a lot of people who are involved in my organization sometimes shop there. Same with Costco. Same with any of the companies where we're targeting them. It's not that we expect that our consumer dollars are going to make a difference on them. Some people, they feel a little irked. They feel a personal kind of conflict with a store, and they don't feel good going in there, and that's fine. And there's nothing, we don't have to go to Chipotle, or we don't have to go to Whole Foods, but I don't know, they have some good vegan options, and we might as well if we're trying to get something to eat, and we've decided not to ever eat animal products. I think that the decision to not eat animal products is something that can really influence the people around us. People start to think of animal products as something that might be a little bit controversial, which is brand new, that anyone would think that eating animals is something that could offend anyone. And in addition to that, a lot of people take the Liberation Pledge, and we make this public commitment to not eat animals, not eat animal products, and to not sit at tables where other people are doing the same, or doing that, eating animals. And that, on top of veganism, can be extraordinarily powerful, because that is when we start to have real conversations with people around us to say that, like, hey, I'm really not comfortable when there are dead animals on the table. And it sets veganism as the norm in a way that sometimes having our own special diet doesn't.
Right. Yeah. And I'm glad you shared that clarity with me. I appreciate it because I'm the same way too. If I'm traveling, I'll have a Chipotle or shop at Whole Foods, that sort of thing. But I feel the exact same way. I think it's not really going after these businesses where that might be a common misconception for maybe past buyers. May think, what you guys are doing, or many other activists, is that you're against these companies, but what you're against is really some of the services and products, air quotes there, that they sell to people, and you just want them to have better practices, and that is, offering more plant-based foods, and passively. I would say too, it's also voting with your dollar. It's supply and demand, and if more people are demanding these vegan products, plant-based foods from these companies, they'll look at that. They'll see, hey, our sofritas are doing really great. Let's invest more in that and start pushing that more.
For sure, we've definitely seen that all over the place. Seen more companies interested in plant-based versions of things, and that's great. And I think that people being more skeptical of animal products has certainly done that. And at the same time, our ask to these companies is never to add more vegan options, because again, we really want to decenter humans in this conversation. We really want to talk about what animals are going through. And what I would love to see from Whole Foods is for them to stop selling animal products and to stop lying about animal products. They say that that animals are treated well. They say that they have this animal welfare promise, that they're promising that all of their animals have been certified by the GAP program, the Global Animal Partnership, and that means that they're treated well, and that's a lie. And so that's our ask to the companies, is that they stop lying about the way animals are treated, and that they ultimately stop hurting them.
Exactly, and it's not impossible. I mean, we've seen it with the company Elmhurst. You're aware of Elmhurst, right? It was a big dairy company. They were founded, I believe, in 1925, and only until a couple of years ago they started releasing plant-based milks completely. So they shift from dairy to releasing just plant-based milks, which is amazing.
That's beautiful, yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story. And there's another dairy company, which I think also was founded in 1925. And oddly enough, they filed for bankruptcy in 2019 of last year. So, it just goes to show, yeah, if you don't change your ways, in a way, supply and demand, there are more people demanding vegan options. And I know, like, we want people to stop, producing animal products completely. And I think Elmhurst is a great example of that. So it's not impossible. Obviously, there's results there. But I want to go back to you know uh, some of the consequences that activists face. Whether it's going into these establishments, or whether it's going into labs or animal factory farms. What are some of the consequences that you've seen, some of your activists face?
Well, like I mentioned before, none of our cases have actually gone to trial yet. So when we talk about real sentences, when we talk about actually spending time in prison, our organization hasn't been there yet, and we fully expect to. We have had activists go to jail. I myself have been to jail after being arrested and declining bail, and that's no fun. And that's just for a few days. That's still no fun at all. It's really not a good place to be. It's a place where you're really there to be punished. It's a place where you're treated like you don't matter, and you're not really given any autonomy at all, of course. And it's not something that I would wish upon anyone. And our activists are willing to do it. We're taking these risks, and we're understanding that those are the consequences that we might face, and that could be for a few days, that could be for years. And we have a lot of people who've gone right inside of places where animals are being abused, kind of fully knowing that it could mean years in prison. And also we really believe that sacrifices have to be made, and that we need to have people who are willing to make really meaningful sacrifices, because that's kind of a really important way to show the importance of this cause, that it's not just a hobby, it's something that is an emergency.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, what about like some of the confrontations that you've noticed from the establishments themselves and some of like maybe the farmers and the workers? How, do people generally get aggressive with you guys? I'm just kind of curious what that experience is like.
Sure, we've definitely seen violence both in our protests from people, not from our activists, from other people have become violent with our activists in protests and in rescues. There was a situation, I believe there was a situation where activists were threatened with a gun after doing frontline surveillance, this completely legal form of observation of farms, going to public property and watching using cameras and drones maybe. And we've seen people be shoved, be knocked down. Honestly, I think we're going to see much more violence than we've seen already, because of the way that backlash is escalating in every direction.
I was just going to say, do you think they're in farmers, for example, do you think they anticipate it more now?
For sure, they definitely anticipate it more. We know that the industry groups are talking about us. We hear them talking about us. We see their posts. There are even trainings that they run sometimes to teach farmers how to deal with activists. And luckily, they know that violence doesn't make them look very good. When you're actually violent towards someone, you look like the bad guy, and we know that too. And so, hopefully, that message is understood by all parties, and that we can have a completely nonviolent revolution around this. And we also understand that there's a risk of violence when we go into places. And I mean, I think the closest that we've come to real sacrifice in this way is at that duck farm that you mentioned at the beginning of the call. There was there were ducks who were on the slaughter line, still alive on the slaughter line, not yet hurt. And our activists took them down and brought them to safety, and then locked their own bodies to the slaughter line. And this is a really symbolic way to put ourselves in between the violence that's happening and the people who are doing it. And because we're lucky enough to be born human, to be born people who are worth more to society than the animals. And so while you won't face murder charges for hurting an animal, you will for hurting one of us. And so our activists chained themselves to the slaughter line, and then one of the employees turned on the slaughter line, and this strangled one of the activists. This he was purple in the face. It hurt him really badly. He is a massage therapist, and he wasn't able to work for months. And I mean, luckily he survived, but it certainly could have gone a different way. And that was something that our activists were aware of going into it.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the more intense videos that I've seen because he was so close. He was what I would say inches away from death, and almost looked like he was suffocating, which is crazy. So yeah, I'd imagine you guys have seen probably a few of those situations. But you know what? I even think it's odd though that like a very simple like protest at Whole Foods would get Wayne Chung from he's the founder of DXC, would get him arrested simply for just going in. He didn't even protest if I remember correctly. Didn't he just ask a simple question?
He did, yeah. He asked a question. So this is a Colorado Whole Foods last couple years ago, I think, and he asked a question. He wanted to know where the farms are, and he was told to leave, but then like there was another employee who was kind of interested in talking to him, and so he stayed to talk to this employee, and then he was told to leave by somebody else. It was very confusing, kind of who was in charge and what the direction actually was, and then then he left, and then the police came and arrested him. And really interesting thing about this is that he had no intention of taking any kind of like deal. Most criminal cases end in some kind of deal, so somebody pleads guilty to something or accepts some kind of terms so that the charges go away. And he had no interest in doing that, even though it was a very minor charge. It was like trespass. It was one misdemeanor, and he declined a deal that he got offered. And so then they offered him a better deal, and then declined that one. And then it was something like the day before, 2 days before trial, they just completely dropped it because they had no intention of arguing this case. Whole Foods wasn't actually going to show up to court. They just wanted to punish him. They just wanted to tell him that he better not be asking any more questions. And ultimately, kind of by standing his ground, the whole thing went away, and they weren't actually interested in having that conversation.
Right. Yeah. I just thought that was nuts that you can't even go and ask simply a question about how your food is being made. I think anytime a company denies you that or threatens to punish you for that, I think that should say something in itself. Um, are you able to talk a little bit about Wayne, what he is up to these days, and if he's still active with his activism?
Yep. Wayne is still active, still very active. He was the lead organizer of Direct Action Everywhere up until about September. Then he stepped down to kind of be able to focus more on his charges, on his upcoming cases. And he is being sued in 3 different cases right now. So those are 3 different civil cases where he is being personally sued. And then he also has something like 16 pending felony charges. Don't quote me on that number, but it's a lot. So he has a bunch of trials coming up this year, which he's getting ready for. He has some civil cases that he's working on, and he is likely we're going to hear some really big news from him in coming weeks. Not at liberty to share quite yet, but he's definitely a very busy person and doing some really exciting things, including going to trial and really putting his own future on the line to have these conversations in a public venue.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I wish him the best of luck. I wish all you guys the best of luck with the work that you're doing and all the cases that you have going. But I wanna kind of ask you this last question with activists for activists around the world. What advice would you have to give them to kind of keep them legally safe and also successful with their activism to at the end of the day be able to rescue animals just like you guys do?
Well, legally safe is always a conversation to have with a lawyer. It's great to have friends who can give you legal advice. It's good to have, if you're going to do anything legally risky, it's really important to have the name of a good defense lawyer on hand just in case something goes wrong. And also to kind of have someone to let you know what your rights are in your particular area where you live in the world. And just in terms of general advice, I think that I think that our movement is really in need of a lot more thought leadership. I would love to see more people kind of really doing a lot of research on their own and reading about how other social movements have been successful and really figuring out what that means for where they are in the world. Maybe that means that they need to go to the nearest major city and work there. And maybe it means that they need to improve their own skills more so that they can be a more useful advocate for the movement. Maybe it means that they can come up with new ideas about how climate justice and animal rights can intersect, and those two movements can kind of harness their power to do greater work together. I think that a lot of people are trying to put activism in their lives in a way that is sustainable, and that's really important. And so maybe that means that they're just going out on weekends and doing a cube or doing a vigil or doing a protest or something like that. And I would love to see more leaders, because there's nothing that I'm qualified to do, or that anyone really in DXC is like particularly qualified to do, and that's the reason they're doing it. It's just that some people step up, and I think that we need way more leaders. We need a lot more people who are willing to step up, who are willing to better themselves for the purpose of making the world a better place, and don't wait for anybody to give you permission to do it.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. And if people want to learn more about DXC, what you guys do, where can people go and do that?
You can go to our website. That's directactioneverywhere.com. You can go to our Facebook page. We're super active on Facebook. That's just Direct Action Everywhere -DXE. You can, those are main ways. And you can also just Google Direct Action Everywhere and look at a lot of the work that the media has done about the work that we're doing.
Awesome stuff. Well, Eva, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Want to thank you guys again, all of you guys at DXC, for the awesome work that you guys do. Keep it up, and keep speaking up for the voiceless.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure talking to you. And then just one more plug, righttorescue.com has information about our legal cases and also a petition that we would love it if folks would sign.
Awesome. And I'll have all that in the links, everything I'll have in the description below. So you guys can check it out. All right, Eva, thank you so much.
Hey, thank you so much.
Have a good night.
You too.